Good afternoon, and welcome to the panel discussion on creating P&T dossiers to describe interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary scholarship and creative expression. We're so grateful that so many of you are able to join us today. Just for your knowledge, this event will be recorded so that others who are unable to join can access the information later. Our goal today is to have an informative and useful discussion about creating dossiers for promotion and tenure that successfully go beyond disciplines to describe interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary scholarship and creative expression. Inter and transdisciplinary are terms that we'll define here in just a bit. This panel features Dr. Helen Malone, Vice Provost for Academic Policy and Faculty Resources, and a group of faculty leaders whom I'll introduce later in the webinar. We'll seek to have about 30 minutes at the end of our time here today for questions. So please be thinking about those, and please use the Q&A function to ask your questions. To kick us off, it is my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Bruce McFerrin, Executive Vice President and Provost of Ohio State. There's truly no one better to kick off this conversation today than Provost McFerrin. He has been instrumental in his leadership and support of interdisciplinary scholarship. Without his strong support, we would not have come nearly as far as we have come in creating the institutional structures that enable and grow opportunities for interdisciplinary and engaged scholarship and creative expression here at Ohio State. Bruce, thank you so much for starting us off with a few wise words.
Alina, thanks for the opportunity, and good noonday, as my old Ohio State chemistry professor used to say a millennium ago. Just an absolute delight to join you for a few minutes here. Interdisciplinary work is at the heart of the breakthroughs that we will achieve in all of our individual disciplines. Each of us trains to become expert in a particular corner of science, art, history, humanities broadly, engineering, and that is to be absolutely celebrated. But one of the real gifts of being in a place like the Ohio State University is, in fact, our opportunity to connect with others who bring a different perspective to many of the same questions that we're interested in examining. And I think we all have seen around us that many of those breakthrough concepts really come where different sorts of folks, backgrounds, training, experiences, methodological approaches actually have the opportunity to collide, if you will, and interact in an environment that's supportive. Now, this requires an institutional commitment as well as an individual commitment. You as individuals have to be willing to look beyond the confines of your own discipline and learn from others and engage with those others and teach others as part of your scholarship. The institution has to welcome those successes. We've just concluded another promotion and tenure cycle. And so the timing of this, I think, is really important because you'll hear from Helen Malone some of the things that any of you could be doing to actually further amplify the successes that you're having as you create your own dossiers. The work that we're doing as researchers, as artists, et cetera, is extraordinarily important to document in our traditional ways. But one of the things Ohio State is doing is breaking boundaries of how we think about the impact of the work that we're doing. And we see many, many great examples. It really requires you to take the responsibility to account for your role in something that looks a little non-traditional, perhaps in your field. What I've seen these past 6 promotion and tenure cycles as provost, and even prior to that as dean of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences, is an absolute celebration of your success in achieving that. I came here to Ohio State in 2012 in large part because I saw an institution that was willing to put its money where its mouth was at working across boundaries. That commitment at that point led to the discovery themes, which has been an extraordinarily powerful way to bring many of you together into this institution to really change the trajectory of how we think about the impact of our intellectual contributions. Discovery themes weren't the first cross-boundary hiring program. They will not be the last. Ohio State really has had a dedication to making this work, and the scholarship that you bring forward will actually not only change how we operate here at Ohio State, but truly will change the world. I've been talking about research and creative inquiry, and I think we all would recognize that that extends so seamlessly to the way that we teach, whether it's teaching at the graduate level. These programs are a strong attractor to graduate students who want to think about problems in their discipline from a different perspective. And likewise, we as faculty benefit from the connections those graduate students make across laboratories, across programs, across colleges, to bring new ideas into our programs about how to interact. And so, that is, I think, just an obvious extension of what we do in our research. But one of the magical things about a place like Ohio State is that as we as faculty are creating these new ideas, we're also carrying them into all of our classrooms. And so undergraduates benefit as well. And we've seen many new curricula emerge that have real power for our students, both satisfying their own intellectual curiosity, but also preparing them to be thought leaders as they enter the workforce. And so, let's continue to think about what we're doing from an interdisciplinary, a transdisciplinary approach as really changing the paradigm completely about how we work as a university. We have lots of great examples of success, and we'll continue to drive those forward. This is Board of Trustees Week here at Ohio State. And I'll just say to you, by way of tangibly reinforcing this, yesterday at the Wexner Medical Center Board, Peter Moeller gave a report on extramural research, and his first statement was, the future of our work is teamwork. And I couldn't agree with that more. This afternoon, Executive Vice President Grace Wong will give a similar message to the Research, Creative Inquiry, and Innovation Committee of the board. Over and over again, we're reinforcing both with our actions and our intent exactly how we can support this kind of work, but it really relies on you. We want you to be successful. None of us who are in a position of hiring faculty have ever hired a single person to fail. We brought you here to succeed. We brought you here actually to change the world, literally and figuratively. And so I hope that what you take away from this afternoon's session are some tangible ideas about how to make sure that you're truly putting your best foot forward. You're doing great work. How do you document that? How do you talk about it? How do you drive it forward to make sure that you're creating the new culture for the Ohio State University? Alina, thanks for the opportunity to say a few words. It's back to the Board of Trustees for me, but I'm certainly hoping that there's a lot of give and take here this afternoon with our faculty in trying to figure out exactly how they can highlight their successes to all of us throughout their career.
Bruce, thank you so much. Thank you for the vision, the leadership, the keen insights. And we are glad that we could steal you away for a few minutes from the Board of Trustees meeting. So with that, we will now turn to the rest of our panel, and I'll be moderating the panel. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alina Irwin. I'm the faculty director for the Sustainability Institute here at Ohio State. I'm also a professor in agricultural, environmental, and development economics in the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences. So next up, I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Helen Malone, Vice Provost for Academic Policy and Faculty Resources. Helen will be speaking first to provide an overview of interdisciplinary research and the P&T, or promotion and tenure process, here at Ohio State. Helen will speak for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll hear from each of our other members of the panel for about 5 minutes apiece. And again, then we're going to open it up for questions. So please do use the Q&A function of Zoom here to pose your questions. We really, and I just want to pause and say, we really want to encourage you to ask any and all questions, including the tough and hard questions, and please don't be shy. Please, if you're at all hesitant, please just use the anonymous function. That's an easy thing to do in Q&A. And we really would like to hear your straightforward and honest questions. So Helen, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alina. Give me 1 second, everybody, to get my screen shared, I guess would be the right word here. Share to the beginning. Press play. All right, we tested this, so thank you so much. Great, thanks, Alina, for having me today. One of the really big parts of my job is actually helping manage the promotion and tenure and promotion process here at Ohio State. And so I see a lot of dossiers every year. And so I'm so happy to be able to come here and have this conversation with this group. So what I was asked to do was to give an overview of interdisciplinary research and the promotion and tenure process at Ohio State. And I will say that we do workshops all the time that are several hours in length to do this. And so I have about 15 to 20 minutes. So what am I really going to do? I'm going to start by trying to level set some definitions for us so that we're all talking about the same thing. I'm going to give you a really high level overview of the process, but I want to affirm right now, and I'll say it again in a little bit, that if you have questions, you are always welcome to reach out to the Office of Academic Affairs and ask. I'm happy to talk. At any point. Also, every college has an associate dean for faculty affairs, and so they're available to answer questions too. So I know it's going to be really high level, but there are resources for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the responsibilities for those who have joint appointments and how you as faculty members play a role in that process. And then I want to talk a little bit about telling your story, which I think is probably the key ingredient to this entire process. And as we move through the rest of the panel, there are going to be many tips and tricks provided to you, but it really does ultimately come down to how well you tell your story to those who are around you. So let's start with some definitions. First, I need to thank Casey Hoy, who prepared these next couple of slides for use here. So if you think about a sort of traditional faculty career, you can think of this circle as the discipline. And that as you begin to do work in a specific area. Bruce was alluding to this, and you engage in that work. It's generally recognized by your peers who can judge its impact, who can judge its quality. And as you build that niche and that work, you move through to promotion with tenure to associate professor. As you then move farther through your career, the goal is to then expand what you're working on. Sometimes it goes beyond the discipline, and that work and that expanding impact is what moves you to promotion to professor. Okay, so this is sort of our traditional picture of a faculty career. I think we can say that disciplinary and multidisciplinary really capture what I just described, that it's pretty straightforward in that process to identify what the unique contribution of scholars is in that work, right? And so someone can look at it and say, oh, this is the work that you did, this was your contribution, this is the impact that you had on this field. So it's fairly discrete and a bit easier to pull that information. As Bruce said, the importance of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work really cannot be overstated. It really is how we move the world forward. The challenge is that as you move in those spaces, it becomes progressively more difficult to sort of pull out your work and say, this is my work, this is my contribution, this piece is what I did. And so how is it that we can support the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work of our faculty by positioning them to be able to share their stories, so that the TIU faculty, those who vote initially on your packages, are prepared to review your material and know how to judge the work that you're doing. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I want to make sure we started with these definitions. As we were preparing for this session, we sort of got into some conversations about interdisciplinary, faculty doing interdisciplinary work, faculty doing transdisciplinary work, with an assumption that all of those faculty would be in departments that are disciplinary in nature. And the reason I started thinking about this is because I'm in a department, my home department has never been disciplinary in nature. So when I started at Ohio State, I was in the School of Physical Activity and Educational Services, which covered everything from sport management, sport physiology, to special education, counselor education. And so when I went up for promotion with tenure, I had to prepare my materials for sports physiologists, which I'm not, by the way, to be able to read. So imagine if you're doing interdisciplinary work or transdisciplinary work, and you're in a department that has multiple disciplines. Really, what you get to is really two things. One, telling your story, which we'll talk about a little more in just a minute. The other, and possibly most important thing for you to hear, is that you cannot make assumptions about what the faculty around you know, understand, respect, believe about the kind of work that you're doing. Really, it becomes incumbent upon you in preparing your materials to imagine that you're trying to describe to somebody who maybe has no idea what you're doing, why it's important, and how you're having an impact. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think if you step into the promotion and tenure process with the notion that the faculty members voting on your case really might not have a good idea of what it is you're doing, frames your job as the one preparing your materials for how you might go about telling your story in a way that it brings people along with you so that they understand what you're doing and they can see where the impact is. But the key, you have to start at the beginning without making an assumption about what the people around you know or don't know. So with that framing, here is the very high level overview of what happens in the promotion and tenure process. I added a box here in the upper left for joint appointments. Those faculty who have joint appointments have an appointment in multiple departments or multiple units, and one unit holds tenure and all the other units do not hold tenure. So the only faculty voting on our jointly appointed faculty are those faculty from the tenure initiating unit, so the sort of primary unit. So there are processes in place to recruit feedback from the joint appointments so that that part of the story is included in the materials that are put under review. So at the very start of the process, the chair of the TIU or the chair of the P&T committee is expected to reach out to the chair or lead of the joint appointment and seek a letter to be included in the dossier materials for the candidate. And then we go through this process. This first row is the departmental or the tenure initiating unit review, which is the committee of eligible faculty review and vote. The TIU head does their own independent review. The candidate is given an opportunity to comment. The committee and the chair have an opportunity to respond, and then that level of review is done. There is no opportunity beyond the letters that are provided for the joint appointments to engage in this process. So those letters are really, really important, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. The second level of the process goes to the college. The college committee reviews, and really what they're asking for is, was the process followed? And what they do is they make a recommendation to the dean. The dean then makes their own independent review. Those two letters are shared with the candidate who has an opportunity to respond, and the college has an opportunity to respond. They then come to me at the university level. For colleges that don't have departments, I have a committee at the university level that reviews all of those cases for a third level of review. And any case that has any mixed vote in the process, so if the committee of eligible faculty were to say no, if the chair were to say no, if the dean were to say no, if any of those bodies said no, that would come to the university for a review, a formal review, and the provost would make decisions in those instances. I review all other dossiers over the course of the sort of first quarter of the year. And then once that's done, they go to the board. So actually, anybody whose material went in this year are at the board today. And that completes the process for the year. So it's a complex process. And one of the things that you should see pretty quickly is that every statement I made about writing your story for your committee, the farther away from your committee of eligible faculty your materials get, the less likely it is that the people reading your materials have a good idea about what it is you're doing. So when I'm reading dossiers, I would say, probably 40% of the time, I can get enough of a story to understand. But there are a couple cases that I'll read every year that I'll read and I'll say, it looks like everything went well and followed process, and I have no idea what that person's research really is, right? I can get a really high level picture, but I don't have enough context to really know what they're doing. In those cases, thankfully, everything has gone well. So they've gotten through the processes. But when they come to the university committee, we often ask a lot of questions to say, well, how does this apply to this unit? We'll reach out to units for additional information. But there you go, there's the process. So again, I'm going to sort of reiterate the don't make assumptions statement, because your materials are being reviewed at a number of steps. And yes, your faculty in your unit are voting on them, but so too are a number of other bodies. A couple of really quick resource points. I encourage everybody to read the appointments, promotion, and tenure document for their tenure initiating unit. Those are all available on the OAA website. The currently approved version is the one on the OAA website, so I encourage you to use that version. But to review that and make sure you understand what the criteria are within your own unit. In January of every year, we do a P&T overview, a several-hour workshop, and that January session is targeted to the faculty. And then in April, August, and October, we do 2-hour sessions that are really targeted for the people managing the process within the department and the college. You are welcome to attend any or all of those, and you're welcome to come back for more if you attend one and you feel like you're not quite there. And also, you're always welcome to reach out to me in OAA to answer questions. I'm always happy to answer questions. So joint appointment expectations. You'll notice that it doesn't say anything in here about the faculty member will do X, Y, or Z. It's all the tenure initiating unit head will contact the joint appointment head, and they'll solicit feedback for annual reviews, or in the case of promotion and tenure, the TIU head or the P&T chair will solicit the letter from the joint appointment head. So having said that, here's something that I think is incredibly important for anybody with a joint appointment in particular. By practice and policy, it is not the faculty member who needs to make these requests. However, it is to the benefit of the candidate, the faculty member themselves, to check in with the TIU head and say, hey, I'm just checking in. Did you get feedback for my annual review letter? Or, hey, I'm just checking in. Did you check in with the joint appointment head to get a letter for my materials? This does several things. One, it ensures that the information, the voice from the joint appointment is part of your packet, part of your materials. It also has the benefit of earlier in the window of time to get on board everybody that needs to be on board for your materials to be complete. Occasionally, there is a ball is dropped, and a TIU head will call a joint appointment head at the very last second and say, oh my gosh, I need a letter and I need it tomorrow. That doesn't serve any benefit to the faculty member. It's incredibly stressful for the joint appointment lead. It's stressful for the committee of eligible faculty. All around, it's stressful when we do things at the last minute. Are packets completed? Absolutely. Is it done in a way that really gives people time to think and sort of simmer in the space and really decide how they want to write letters, how they want to present arguments? So my second encouragement to you is to take some ownership and responsibility in this process, that as a faculty member with a joint appointment, it is my strongest recommendation to you that you have some checkpoints with your TIU head to just check in and make sure that the things that the TIU head is responsible for are happening. It will be to your benefit, to their benefit, and to the joint appointment's benefit. And this is the way that we get the voice of the joint appointment into the materials. So it's really important. And so I strongly encourage you to engage in this space. Okay, so the very last thing I want to share, and we'll come to you as we go further on, is that the overarching goal for any faculty member going through promotion and tenure is to do a good job telling your story. It is partly about filling in the blanks of what publications did you have, what was your percentage effort in the work, what was your contribution to the work. All of that is important. The thing that ties all of the sort of numbered content within a dossier together is the narrative sections in the dossier. So you have the opportunity as a faculty member to write an introduction, to write a teaching narrative, to write a research narrative, and to write a service narrative. I encourage everybody in the introduction narrative to include some information about what your appointment is. So if you have a joint appointment, to actually spell out right at the very beginning what your appointment is and where it's allocated. So people know right off the bat, if you have a 50-50 split appointment, that faculty who are voting on your case represent 50% of your appointment. Those 50% of your appointment faculty should be looking for information on the other 50% of your appointment. If you don't spell that out and make it clear, it has the possibility of getting lost in the noise of reading through these materials. So that's what I suggest putting there. And then across your teaching, research, and service narratives, I always encourage people to think about what is the point, right? What is me? Who am I? How am I represented as a scholar? Those narratives are your space to paint that picture and to tell that story. So tell your story. Is your story. And it's that opportunity that people utilize when determining whether or not you've achieved what is expected to be promoted or promoted with tenure. So I just want to reiterate these last couple of things. The key takeaways here, and we're going to get into details as this panel moves forward. But number one, don't make assumptions. Don't assume that the people around you know what it is that you're doing or understand what it is that you're doing, you are going to have to make them aware of what it is you do and what you represent. Take responsibility in the process. Even though most of these things don't require, by policy, you to take an action, it is to your benefit to make sure the process is working for you. And don't make an assumption that all of the pieces and parts are being pieced together. We expect it. We prepare people to make that happen, but it doesn't always happen. And so owning some of that process and checking in on the process is a really, really wise idea. And then finally, tell your story. It is about you. It is about the work that you do. It is about the impact that you're having. And you have to tell that story. Nobody else can do it in this process. So really think about how you want to tell your story. So with that, Alina, I'm going to turn it back to you. And then I'll be here for questions as we get to the end.
Helen, fantastic. Thank you so much. That was great. Amazing insights, overview, and advice. And in the end, it's true. We're all storytellers, and we certainly can't ignore the critical importance of narrative. Just to let our audience know that there was a question in the Q&A, we will be sharing out resources from the panel afterwards. And Helen, I'm assuming that we can also include your slides in that. Yes, nodding, yes, good. So yeah, you all will get a copy of those. I'd now like to introduce now the next portion of the panel, our other members, each of whom will speak for about 4 or 5 minutes, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So keep your Q&A coming in the Q&A function here, and we will get to that in the remainder of the time. I'd like to, I'll just go through all of these at once, and we'll be speaking in this order. First up is Dr. Tanya Berger-Wolf, Faculty Director for Translational Data Analytics Institute, or TDAI, as well as a Professor of Computer Science in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. Dr. Casey Hoy will then be second, Faculty Director for the Initiative of Food and Agricultural Transformation, or InFACT, Professor of Entomology and the Kellogg Endowed Chair in Agricultural Ecosystem Management. I will be third. And then we will hear, so those are 3 interdisciplinary faculty leaders here at the university. Then you'll hear from the departmental chair perspective, Dr. Allison McKay, Chair and Professor of Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering. And finally, we'll hear from a college perspective, Dr. Tracy Kitchell, Senior Associate Dean and Director of Faculty and Staff Affairs in the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences, as well as Professor in the Department of Ag Communications, Education, and Leadership. So with that, let me turn it over to Tanya, and we'll just go straight in that order.
Thank you, Lina. And I want to add a couple of appointments to my name, and this is actually important in this specific context, because I have, in addition to being a discovery theme hire myself, I have appointments in 3 other departments. So I'm a professor in computer science and engineering, electrical computer engineering, and evolution, ecology, and organismal biology. So 3 departments and TDI, and a discovery theme across 2 colleges, as well as the discovery theme, which is OA. So that is as complicated as probably is possible, but I don't, I came as a full professor, so I don't have to go through the promotion and tenure process here. So there's a question which I want to right away address, whether we will export the Q&A itself and save it. I will defer to Kathy Jackson, and Jenny Grabmeyer, who are monitoring things behind the scenes. Hopefully, yes. So that's a good point. And so with that, couple of going into a little bit more specifics and starting with a couple of tips about how do you actually tell your story? How do you highlight what's unique to you being an interdisciplinary faculty? So I put it in the answer already in the Q&A. One of the paragraph that I include in every letter that I write for Faculty Forum to DI and I encourage you to have a customized version of this, is that the importance of interdisciplinary research and scholarship, as is often pointed out, is that complex problems typically require complex solutions and expertise from more than one discipline, that discoveries and innovations often happen where disciplinary boundaries meet, and the directions, connections, and interactions across disciplines expand in discipline methodologies, scope, and perspectives. On the other hand, conducting interdisciplinary research and scholarship takes more time and effort, but often with higher impact when successful, since interdisciplinary researchers have to establish presence in more than one community, attend more conferences and meetings, work in teams with different disciplinary vocabularies and conceptual frameworks, align multidisciplinary methodologies and priorities, train students in multiple expertise, and publish in venues that may be outside their core discipline or are newly established interdisciplinary journals. And so this highlights both, the in general, the impact and the advantages and challenges of interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, multi-transdisciplinary research. Make this your own in the introduction and be explicit. What are the impacts? Why are you doing it? And for that, there is a very recent, every funding agency and your probably own society, professional society, or collection of professional societies right now has some form or version of grand challenges, including OSU, right? So the discovery themes are grand challenges. And so making it upfront and saying this is the one that you are contributing to, whether it's the NSF's big ideas, or the OSU's TDI and discovery themes, or the NIH grand challenges, identify where you fit, right? Because these grand challenges are already written requiring interdisciplinary collaboration. So saying that this is the one that you're part of and what your and how you contribute to that in the introduction makes it easier to position and understand the importance. And then there are 4 dimensions typically of impact. The science and engineering scholarship, kind of your core, the output, the product, which is the product of research and scholarship itself, workforce development, economic impact, and innovation. And if you can address all 4 of those, that's great. And workforce, notice that this is about mentoring students, this is about education, the courses that you develop, that's about the impact on workforce. And the economic impact quite often is in terms of the dollar signs that you bring that you bring into the department, to the college, through your funding, or through the teaching credits that your department receives, as well as if you have started other kinds of collaborations with external stakeholders. That's economic development, whether it's community partnerships, community engagement, that is economic impact. And addressing that in this context actually makes it clear. And innovation is not only about startups that can come out, or patents, or businesses that are developed, but also about nonprofit initiatives and government collaboration. That's innovation. And so putting it in the context of those 4 dimensions and being specific and explicit about what is your expertise, your contribution to those. And you can go through all of those, all of your dossier. I ask faculty to literally highlight their dossiers in yellow, anything that's interdisciplinary, anything that's in sort of TDI's case, data analytics related, or directly TDI, but the interdisciplinary aspect, and we go through that and then say, okay, so what is unique, right? So if it's about publications and publication venues, addressing and explicitly saying that these publications, this particular venue, for example, combines the computational and quantitative approaches, but speaks to the core discipline. So you're translators, right? You have to constantly translate and highlight that translation. And the intended audience are my core discipline and exposing them to these new methodologies, right? Or this may be a newly established publication from this leading center into this thought center, maybe the International Center for Food Security, and it's their newly established publication, and you're the youngest faculty ever invited to contribute. So this is the ground interdisciplinary conversation and approaches where they're available to the community. Or maybe this is a special issue, and so this, if it's in a different discipline, saying, this is a top journal in this other discipline, which you may not be familiar. So don't be shy to be explicit about this. If you're talking about students, when you're collaborating or co-advising students, whether undergraduate or graduate from different disciplines, it is your specific expertise, right, that is necessary, that could not be replaced. So explain why the student is co-advised, why you're advising students from different departments. That is a good thing, not a bad thing. But also noting that this takes more time. The students will take probably more time to graduate. They need to learn these other aspects of research or methodologies. Similarly, if you're contributing as a reviewer to journals or organizing conferences and workshops outside your discipline, that is a good thing. Highlight this, explain the impact, and the impact across any of those 4 dimensions of core science, engineering, research scholarship, or workforce development, or economic impact, or innovation. Quite often these conferences, particularly community engagement ones, and there is a question in the panel, are about economic and workforce development impact, and it is good to put it in this context. NSF uses the term of creating a diaspora, right? When your impact goes beyond your discipline, so it is a diaspora outside the discipline, and diaspora in the workforce, and economic diaspora and innovation diaspora. And I'll pass it on to Casey.
Thanks, Tanya. It's been a delight to get to know Tanya, and she brings with her a wealth of experience that come from her travels around other universities. I've been around Ohio State long enough to have seen the process from the departmental level, where you see all of the cases that can arise within a department, to the college level, where you see even more different kinds of promotion and tenure cases, and also at the university level, where you see a restricted set of cases. They're the ones that either had a split vote or a negative vote that make it up to the university level. We like to think that it's a very objective and carefully measured process. It's very subjective, really, and it's based on reputation. And I think that's something that we all have to recognize and accept. And where you do occasionally see cases going awry is where you have just a few individuals or even a single individual. It might be in the department, it might be one of the people writing the letters who has an issue, a negative issue that ends up becoming blown way out of proportion. And I want to reassure you that those folks are not your audience, because that's very easy to spot at college and university levels, those cases where there was really undue influence of just a single or just a few individuals who may have thought that all assistant professors should do exactly what they did, maybe 38 years ago, for example. It's pretty easy to recognize those, and those college and university committees have your back in that case. So my first piece of practical advice is to consider your audience the majority of the faculty that are willing to think in a very open-minded way about scholarship and creative expression, and think about what you do and think about it broadly. So right to that larger group, the place where you can do that writing is in the narratives in your dossier. And that's where you have the opportunity to tell your story, both in the biographical narratives, the description of your teaching and your research, and what you write about your contribution to publications, grants, exhibitions, works, however you package your scholarship. We've started a tip sheet that we will circulate afterwards, and we'll use the questions that you're putting into the Q&A to improve and enlarge the number of tips that we respond to. That will help with starting the narratives. But my suggestion is to start with the generally accepted advantages of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work. You can do a review of the academic literature on this, and there's been a lot written. You can just do a search on the internet. You can look at federal granting agencies, and you'll find that any of them have written about the advantages of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work beyond individual disciplines. So start with those. So just a few examples, and there'll be more in the tip sheets, and we'd like to respond to more in the Q&A. Interdisciplinary research can reach a broader audience. So what better way to demonstrate that your work, your niche within your discipline, is having a broader impact than if you can show that it's actually impacting people's work outside of your discipline? Interdisciplinary research allows one to address more complex questions and real-world challenges. As a land-grant university, we're here to address complex real-world challenges. The work that we do in InFACT is addressing food security. That's never been accomplished by the UN definition, by our species, ever. So that is a profound and complex challenge. And there's a role for every discipline in the university in addressing that challenge. Interdisciplinary research can open new avenues of investigation and stimulate new innovation. And that happens within disciplines as well as among disciplines. So when I was in graduate school, a colleague in our department, one of the faculty members in our Department of Entomology, won the Wolf Award. He came from a department of biochemistry. And by combining his view and his expertise in biochemistry with the science of entomology, found a tremendous explosion of research in chemical ecology. So that the intersections between disciplines often spark the innovation. And then finally, transdisciplinary research can solve problems that really are resistant to what we have to offer as academic disciplines, that may depend on specifics, not generalities, that have spatial, temporal, cultural factors that occur in specific situations and may be critically important to the solution to the problem society. So I'll give you one example and then I'll pass it on. I'm part of a group led by Steve Gabassi in the College of Education and Human Ecology that's working on establishing a path or discovering a path to truth and reconciliation with the descendants of the Native American tribes whose land was taken very unjustly so that the federal government would have land to grant for the founding of Ohio State University. Now, that's not something that we're going to approach from within any one particular discipline. And it's not something that we have any hope of really finding that path without engaging the people that are part of these tribes and their lived experience and the knowledge that they have of how that has impacted them and what reconciliation really should look like. So there are a number of additional examples that we'll get to in the Q&A, hopefully, and that we can go to, but start with what the advantages of this kind of work is and build your story from there. I'll pass it on now to Elena.
That's great. Thank you, Casey. It's so great just to have your viewpoint coming at this from so many different levels. It's really invaluable. So I will just spend a couple of minutes because I want to make sure that we leave time for Q&A and want to make sure that we leave time for our two other panelists. The main message that I just wanted to give the audience and spark some discussion potentially about is, coming back to Helen's point about storytelling, it is critically important that we tell our story and we tell our story well. It's an important part of how to do that is to get started early. Don't wait until you are writing your fourth year dossier review packet or your P&T packet, get started early on articulating your unique story and what it is that you are contributing. So then how do you do that? Part of an important way to do that is, I think, to set goals for yourself and also to recruit mentors. Probably many of your departments already have mentoring committees that are set up. But for interdisciplinary researchers in particular, it's important to have mentors that are within the department, but also, for example, in a joint appointment case, mentors who are from that joint partnering unit, or in a case where someone is just interdisciplinary within a unit, fully appointed within a unit, to nonetheless still have mentors from the other disciplinary perspectives that they're touching on or working collaboratively with. And so the mentors can play many different functions, but from a storytelling perspective, they can really help you to develop your narrative and really help make it impactful. So that is something that, from with the Sustainability Institute Discovery Themes faculty that we mentor, we try to do this. We have mentoring committees. We use goals as a way of communicating with department chairs and with the rest of the faculty, as well as with our SI Faculty Advisory Board, what it means to be a jointly appointed SI core faculty with a discovery theme appointment. And that goal setting process is really valuable for not just telling your story, but also helping to communicate that to others. Again, starting early to communicate it to others. It helps establish a transparency so that there are no surprises about what it means to have this appointment. And it really does help to educate all parties involved. For example, from my perspective, it helps to educate me about the disciplinary norms and expectations that are within the department. And it helps to, vice versa, educate the chair and other faculty in the unit about the interdisciplinary expectations that SI has. Now, this is a work in progress, and it does take the responsibility of everyone, not just the senior faculty or the chair or myself, but importantly, coming back to something that Helen said, the responsibility of the faculty member themselves to tell that story. The last thing I wanted to just mention is that we use a definition of interdisciplinarity that is basically about collaborating with others outside your broad discipline and or reaching a broader audience outside your discipline. And by discipline, we're thinking of broad disciplines. So it's not just within subfields of chemistry or economics or history, but it's really reaching across those disciplinary boundaries. But we also recognize that to be a good interdisciplinary scholar, you do need to establish yourself as a recognized expert in your discipline. And so that is really critical. And so my expectations of junior faculty pre-tenure are different because we give them scope to establish themselves as a disciplinary expert. And we put more emphasis on that in the pre-tenure years. And so as you evolve your career, the mix of focus between disciplinary and interdisciplinary can also evolve and often does. So I will stop there and I will hand it over to Allison.
Thank you, Alina. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll speak today from the perspective of a department chair in the context of the arc of a promotion. So I saw that there are some department chairs who are on the webinar. This really speaks directly to your perspective, but I hope for faculty candidates that this provides some thought prompts to engage with your department chair and the head of your P&T committee to ask how promotion review will work, or to highlight practices that you might see as being supportive within your department. So let me start by sharing a little bit that the faculty in the Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering department take a great amount of pride in interdisciplinary. We think that this is really a hallmark of our department, and it's been very much embedded into our department through hires over the past 8 years. So we have a lot of faculty who have had 2 very different degrees, one in engineering, which is not even necessarily in civil engineering, and another degree, such as perhaps in public policy. And our department currently has 7 discovery theme faculty. They're distributed between the SRE and the TDA themes. We also have 7 jointly appointed faculty whose primary tenure home is in our department, and have minority appointments either elsewhere in the College of Engineering, or in fact, actually out for some faculty outside of our college in other colleges at the university. These are not the same people. So in total, there are 9 tenure track faculty out of 26 in the department who have one of these less traditional appointments, I would say, with the expectation that they're going to be engaging in interdisciplinary work. And we additionally serve as the minority department for 2 other jointly appointed faculty. At this stage, most of the faculty in our department who are doing this interdisciplinary research have moved through at least 1 stage of formal review, and 4 of them are tenured. And the unique thing, of course, is that for all of these faculty, there is an element about their work that makes sense for them to have a home in our department. So although this panel is really about the context of promotion, I think it's also important to consider that faculty careers really start at the hiring point. I think there's a lot of opportunity when we look at the intersectional topics that are coming forward under the RAISE initiative that President Johnson talks about. This is a space that Ohio State is going to be in for some time to come. And so really it's important to keep conversations going with things such as, is there a need for 3 degrees to be in the disciplinary area for somebody to be included as a scholar in the department, and thinking about who serves on search committees and P&T committees, that those are folks who are really able to see how the department is advanced by interdisciplinary work and are really looking forward towards future opportunities. And I will say this does bring some challenges at the moment. After so much interdisciplinary engagement, we're now having some conversations about filling the hole in the donut, because there are some critical areas in the department that we need to have some expertise in. But overall, there's been a huge benefit from my perspective in having these interdisciplinary hires. And if you think sort of more publicly, how everybody is being exposed to infrastructure and climate-induced natural hazards as part of the national conversation right now, our department is incredibly well positioned to take advantage of research opportunities that are going to come about from some of those initiatives. So that's really exciting to me, but I have found that what this means is that I need to be continually engaging with these interdisciplinary faculty to really understand their goals, to keep in good conversation with the promotion and tenure and committee of eligible faculty, so that we're laying appropriate groundwork for expectations for promotion. And then also to really understand the landscape at other institutions outside of Ohio State. So we're not unique in terms of having interdisciplinary faculty that may have less traditional scholarship when they're coming forward to promotion. So I think there's a lot of other examples out there and potential resources, particularly in the context of thinking about external letter writers. So from my perspective, I think the tension that really starts to arise is when there's 2 disciplinary approaches that are being brought together that have fundamentally different forms of scholarship. And so that's where engaging the P&T committee to know details of faculty cases earlier than that first formal review at the 4th year. So our department has recently put in place a P&T committee review of candidate dossiers that happens at the end of the 2nd year. And that provides an opportunity to identify if there are any potential issues in terms of progress, but also start to get clarity in terms of interpretation, right? So a candidate might have been receiving somewhat different messaging about how the process would work than we think that we're conveying to them. And so there's opportunity at that point to make adjustments. And so around those conversations, then the dossier is really a critical point. So I would just emphasize all of the points that we've heard already about constructing those narrative sections. That's the piece that I've seen as maybe been the weakest part of the dossier, and all of the rush to figure out where to put things in VITA to really have your dossier message reviewed by some other folks before it's actually going through the formal review process or to the external letter writers. So I think it's really important for department chairs to stay in communication with the members of the faculty who are involved in the promotion process, to anticipate where there may be places in the department APT document that don't yet have enough clarity, have those conversations before cases are actually on the table in front of a committee, and engaging with the other departments in the case of jointly appointed faculty, thinking of who else in the landscape of, in my case, civil engineering departments have got a lot of interdisciplinary focus as a way to help the committee be able to find some key letter writers, which may mean moving away from those well-established peer institutions and really identifying specialists who are have the background really to be able to put a candidate's contributions in perspective. And I think it's important to regularly charge the committee to not make assumptions in terms of their interpretation. And I think the department chairs as well also play a role in doing interpretation of candidate cases as they move forward to the college and then up to the university level. So I think the words of advice I would leave you with for the department chairs is really staying engaged and thinking about the landscape that lies ahead of candidates. And so, you know, you have the role as a leader in your unit to identify potential pinch points that may happen. And this often is where there's some collision between how scholarship happens in interdisciplinary research and what a more traditional portfolio might look like, and to potential candidates to really make sure that you have clarity on how you think the process works. So I know you've probably had advice about asking lots of questions. I would suggest to approach this more from a benchmarking, to talk with your department chair, to talk with members of the promotion and tenure committee to say, this is what I think goes on, and really ask them to ground truth your perspective. I've always found it's been helpful to have conversations with faculty who have not yet been through their first promotion to be clear on what it is that external letter writers are looking at and how they approach a case. Quite often our discussion is really around numbers of publications and amounts of money. And that's not the place that external letter writers engage to really try to understand what you as a whole person and a scholar has contributed to advance your disciplinary field. So I will let Tracy continue with a broader perspective.
Thanks, Allison, and glad to be with you all this afternoon. I'll be speaking from the college perspective, but also as a former department chair here at Ohio State, and then also my perspective as an assistant professor in a multidisciplinary department that was 3 years old when I was an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. So, and I'll just underscore the importance of narratives and storytelling. And I won't go into my story; it's very similar to Helen's. But I think related to that, though, think about from the faculty perspective. Ask others both inside and outside your department to review your dossier. It will help surface intuitive leaps that you're making in your narratives. And I think that's really important to think about. I think if you hand over your dossier without getting that kind of feedback, you're going to do yourself a disservice. I was fortunate to be in a department where reviewing that dossier over and over again was just an integral part of our culture. Even though we were only 3 years old as a department, It was sometimes painful to get that dossier back. It felt very bloody from an ink perspective, but I also think that it was a valuable experience. And I think the side piece to that is it did help me solidify my faculty identity. And I think there's a lot to be said about not beyond promotion and tenure, thinking about your faculty identity and who you are and who you want to be and what you want to contribute as a faculty member. I think there's a lot that goes into the satisfaction in general about being a faculty member related to solidifying and working through your faculty identity. For my TIU head colleagues, P&T chairs, one of the things I would consider is having some level setting policy discussions before you engage in deliberations. We do that at the college level. I work with our college P&T committee. I'm only 2 cycles in, having completed, and Casey, you're welcome to pipe in and correct me since you've been on our college committee for the last couple of years. But I find that it's typically not the policies that prevent a valid and reliable evaluation of interdisciplinary work. It's the faculty or the evaluative traditions to which faculty have attached themselves to that prevent that valid and reliable evaluation of cases in particular that don't look typical. And so I think it does, and I think there's a question in the Q&A about this. It does make selecting external reviewers, that needs to be a particularly intentional act. And speaking probably more so to I think department chairs, but thinking about those interdisciplinary scholars, thinking about for those who are faculty, thinking about who you're citing, those institutions that seem to value transdisciplinary work, I think is probably a good start in regard to garnering a list of external letter writers that I think can help out. So related to that, but related to what we do in our college, I walk through the policy language. Some of it's color coded and we deconstruct what it is. And it helps us focus the conversations on what the committee should and should not be talking about, which is really important. And I would also add that beyond interdisciplinarity, it's also good advice in regard to equitable reviews, broadly speaking. I think for eligible faculty in reviewing and thinking about and evaluating your colleagues who are in interdisciplinary spaces, you need to be okay that their trajectory isn't going to look as linear as one might think or expect. So from an example, when I was department chair, and there's a question about community-based research, community leadership was in part of our department. I had a faculty member who focused on community scholarship, and to do that work well, you have to embed yourself in community or in communities. It's about relationship and trust building that takes time before you can even start collecting the data. And so in that particular case, you're not going to have that perfect, linear 45-degree angle trajectory that sometimes I think mentally we want to see. You may not feel as productive in those first couple of years from a publication perspective, but you're setting the groundwork that will lead to those other things. And so I think to the faculty members, making sure you're talking through why you're doing what you're doing and how you're spending time and why that leads to why you have to do that before you're able to do these other things is important. But to department chairs and TIU heads, part of your job is to help explain that story in the annual performance review. And so I think I know in the case that I was talking about around a faculty member working with communities, I was writing that in my letters, and then I would hear the faculty talk about, oh, I didn't think about that. Because on that day-to-day basis, it's not their job to think about it, but it is our job as department chairs to help remind people of what it takes to do different kinds of work. And so I think that's really important to think about. So I think for those of you who are faculty related to that, ways that you can advocate for yourselves is thinking about making sure that when you sit down with your TIU head in your annual performance review, having that explicit conversation with your TIU head about here's what I'm doing and here's what I'm trying to do, and here's where I'm headed, and this is where I think it's going to go. I think those are important conversations to have. And so I hope as department chairs, you're asking those questions. But if you're in the faculty member shoes and they're not asking that, then I would volunteer that information as a part of your conversation. So I think for eligible faculty, you know, we are drawn to those linear trajectories because it makes our assessment of faculty members easier. Valid and reliable assessments are not the same as easy assessments, and we need to be okay with being messy. And so I would caution narrowly defining our expectations for the sake around making our assessments easy. The final piece I'll just kind of leave you with is I would avoid, and this gets to some of the Q&A questions about tenure clock extensions too, like eliminate othering language when it comes to promotion and tenure. And so interdisciplinary work is not an alternative. It's not an alternative route. I think we should not use that language whatsoever. There's one route for promotion and tenure, and it's asking the faculty to do what we asked them to do when we hired them and aligning our values with it. And so if we value and ask for multi, inter, and transdisciplinary work, that's not an alternative route. And that kind of language again implies a less than, and again, that's something I hate. Similarly, othering language like early and late reviews of tenure can also have negative connotations. I've been telling our college faculty that those are words that I don't want to hear. Focus on evaluating using the word ready. As long as the finish line is up, it doesn't matter when they've crossed it. You keep your eyes focused on the finish line, and then you'll be focusing on your evaluation properly. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Alina to talk us through the Q&A.
That's great. Thank you all. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, everyone else, for sharing the wisdom. We've been monitoring the Q&A pretty actively here, and our panelists have done a fantastic job of jumping in and answering some of these online, and then also working some of them into their responses verbally. I'm going to try to hit on a few of these. We've got about 15 minutes left in our panel. Know that we will, as Casey said, be using your questions to help develop a more complete tip list and guidance resource that can come out of this panel. And we will we can take that opportunity to more fully answer some of these questions as well. So the first question I'd like to pose of the panel is actually one that Tanya offered up some information about a paragraph that she includes in TDII letters, and that is to recognize that interdisciplinarity does come with unique transactional costs. For example, it does take more time. And many of you did address this in some of your comments, but I'm wondering if you have any other additional tips specifically on how we can make, when we do have reviewers that perhaps are not as familiar with the interdisciplinary endeavors, how do we help for those people to have appropriate expectations? I mean, it's not always going to be the case that we have reviewers that align exactly with what we're doing. And are there strategic ways to strategically build aspects of transactional costs into the dossier story as a reminder? And do you have any other recommendations? So I'll just, Tanya, as I said, has put a really great paragraph in the Q&A that she uses in all of her letters. I think that's tremendously helpful. I'm wondering if others on the panel would like to weigh in on this question.
So from my perspective, I think it's layered. I think it's layered. One, I think for those of you who are eligible faculty, if you're thinking about those transactional costs and you value that will be a part of the process, I think one, having the conversation about how you want that represented in your APT document is an important conversation to have so that it's explicit. I always prefer explicit language in the APT document when it comes to this. I think we could say the same thing, quite frankly, around work in diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. If you value it, then talking about the time that it takes to do that work, I think should be underscored in the APT document. So I think at that level, that's one of the conversations that can be had. You know, one of the questions, and I think Tanya said about what I would have said around extensions, like, you know, extensions are supposed to be tools along the way, and I think Helen could probably speak more along those lines. It's important to not consider them a last-minute effort. It's really to think about them as an intentional tool for you to think about, and going back to again, that concept of readiness. You know, if it takes somebody a little bit longer to be ready, and I think there are cases for interdisciplinary work where that makes a lot of sense, then giving people the time to cross the finish line, the appropriate amount of time, as long as we're willing to keep the finish line up, I think is important. So having those conversations early with your department chair, I think, is very important, and making sure that it's potentially part of your plan as you move forward, I think is an important aspect to consider.
I want to
go ahead. Well, the thing I would add to that, Tracy, I think those are really great points. The first thing, I actually put the university rule in one of the other answers about tenure clock extensions, and that sense of like something didn't work, or something, you know, you tried something and it just did not work as you anticipated. That's one of those reasons for asking for a tenure clock extension. But it's essential that those conversations are being had outside of you. If you're just trying to do stuff and it's not working and you're not telling anybody, nobody's going to know that you need support. So again, back to the don't make assumptions. People aren't going to know if you don't talk to them. Second, and maybe in some ways more importantly, at Ohio State, annual review letters are part of the dossier that goes forward for review. So as you are talking about the kind of work that you are doing, make sure that it's documented in the annual review letter from your chair. And if it isn't, respond with comments. You have the right as a faculty member to do that. Those comments and the letter annually are included in the dossier. So there are moments along the path to promotion and tenure to make sure that the story is there. So it is not just about the narratives. You have responsibility of the narratives. You have the space to tell your story, but your dossier is actually the core dossier, which you write, and then all of the supporting materials. And I would encourage you to utilize those annual reviews, particularly in that space where you do something that doesn't work, right? To simply have nothing in your dossier that because nothing has come to fruition yet, or it's like right there, but it's not in your dossier. It can be documented in your annual review letters. It can be documented in other spaces. It can be sort of captured in your narratives. So talk to people. Don't assume that they know that you're struggling or that you've tried something that didn't work and that you need another pathway. But also remember that the dossier is not just the core dossier, it's also your annual reviews, which are incredibly important.
I want to add to this, kind of, this is a broader conversation, and reorient it from, we tend to focus on risks and failures, and, you know, oh, it's going to take more time, should I take this risk? We should focus on the why you're doing this in the first place, right? Really explain what the impact, why you're focusing, why you're doing diversity and inclusion, why is it important? Why are you doing, you know, you were hired to do interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary sort of research outside of the core discipline. What is the impact? Why are you unique? And so within that, then saying, okay, to do this, these are the kinds of resources I need. And part of those resources is taking more time, taking more effort, talking to communities, right? NSF's, National Science Foundation's career, NIH, early investigator. So there is these early investigator types of grants for and awards for junior faculty across all federal agencies, they all require from a commitment from the department to say that they will support these kinds of activities in this particular way. So for example, career, which I'm most familiar with, you have to put an entire educational sort of component to it, because we're all in academic careers, not in industry, right? So we have educational component. And for that educational component, which goes beyond classroom teaching, if you're developing new courses, if you're engaging through outreach with students beyond your beyond your department, whatever it is that you do, in the reviews, it has to be in the proposal. Here are the resources that I will put in. Here's how the department will support it. And proposals that don't have that commitment from the department, that we will give time, that we will give resources, that we will create structures. So time, resources, structures, right? So these are the three things that are required from the department for all of this. And this is required for all careers. And so the conversation shouldn't be about, oh, I tried and now it didn't happen. I'm going to try. Here's why. Here's what I need for this, right? And so all of that then happens. The buy-in from the department, the buy-in from the university comes in early on.
Great, thank you guys. I do want to get to another question or two. There was a question early on about suggestions and thinking about who our external letter writers should be if the work doesn't fully fit into one disciplinary or another or tradition. Tracy, you answered this somewhat in your comments by emphasizing that selecting external reviewers really does, and letter writers need to be an intentional act. I'm wondering if there are other helpful tips that others might be ready to share. I know, Casey, that's been a topic of conversation among our interdisciplinary research leaders group. I thought maybe you could share a bit from that, and then if others had any additional comments, please feel free to jump in.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So the group that Alina mentions is one that Alina, Tanya, and I are all part of, that's coordinated by the Office of Research on a community of practice on interdisciplinary research leadership. One of the things that we're working on is some kind of boilerplate that department chairs and P&T committee chairs can put into their letters when they request letters of evaluation from external reviewers, and when they're guiding the promotion and tenure committee in a conversation about interdisciplinary work. So those are things that we're working on and we'll be sharing. For the individual faculty member, you do get a chance to weigh in and provide suggestions of people that you could recommend. And I think, again, the place to start would be, who are the people outside of your discipline who recognize what you're doing in an interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary project, and knows what the contribution of and appreciates what the contribution of your discipline and your disciplinary expertise is, because I think that's probably the most powerful and an important message that people in your department, in your tenure initiating unit, your promotion and tenure committee want to see, is how is your disciplinary expertise contributing to this bigger picture. The other thing that you could think about is who are the people who are really good at this in your discipline, who engage in interdisciplinary projects, maybe lead interdisciplinary projects, and know what it takes, know what to look for, know how to talk about the advantages that you're bringing.
Great, thank you.
Just add a little bit to that too, that I think within a candidate's discipline, and maybe this is the last group of people that Casey was talking about, there are people that certainly are appreciative and understand kind of broadening ideas out into new frontiers and not just kind of doing the same, I don't know, more traditional type of research. So finding those people, I think at the end of the day, all of this comes down to actually doing some legwork and being kind of creative. So there's a tendency sometimes for members of the P&T committee that are coming up with lists that, you go to the people that you know in the field. And it's really important to start digging around with all of the databases available. It's not that hard to be able to find some perspectives, but letter writers, and then go to their website, go to Web of Science, see what they're doing. So there needs to be a little bit of an investigation, I think, behind, and not just going to, oh, we need somebody from this very top school over here, or I know this person, they're a really great person, but really making sure that there's alignment with that expertise. And it's going to take a little bit longer to identify who those people are.
Great points, Allison. Sorry.
Just real quick, from a procedural standpoint, one of the things to consider for those of you who are department chairs and P&T chairs, depending on who's sending out the external letter, and this may have been mentioned earlier, but thinking about how you intentionally communicate to letter writers what it is that you value, I think, is important as it relates to your criteria for APT. And so there are those templates on the OAA's website, but you can alter those. They're a good starting point. We're looking at that as a college right now, as I work with our department chairs on articulating some things that our college values as it relates to our APT document, so that we can, again, think about how do we strengthen the kinds of external reviews that we get.
That's great. Thanks, Tracy. I'm going to pitch this question to Helen, and I know it's going to put us probably a minute or two late beyond our 1:30 deadline. So apologies to the audience. Helen, there was a question about being concerned in response to what you were saying about officially responding to any review letters or dossier reviews for fear of retaliation or poisoning relationships going forward. Can you give any advice on how to move through that with minimal negative impacts?
Yeah, so I think the place I would start is to just be considerate of how you're engaging in any kind of response. So there's a way to be politic and collegial in responding, even if you disagree with someone, and there's a way to be highly antagonistic. So don't be antagonistic, but do say, I just have some concerns, or I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about this. I would follow that up by saying, if you experience retaliation, you should reach out immediately. You can reach out to me, you can reach out to your associate dean, you can reach out to the college and say, I responded in this way, and this is the response I got back. I'm concerned. Flag it now. Don't go through the process and say nothing, but actually just flag it, raise it, and say, I'm feeling uncomfortable about the way this response is being handled. So be diplomatic, be kind in your response. And if you are seeing a retaliation, then reach out immediately. And the university has really clear expectations about not retaliating. And so there would be support put up in place if that is what you're experiencing. So I guess I would follow that by saying, don't not say something because you're afraid of retaliation. If someone's going to retaliate, that's not you. That's not, someone else has to step in and prevent that retaliation from continuing. But saying nothing and just sort of saying, oh, I'm uncomfortable about this, I want to respond, but I don't want there to be negative impact, is almost worse than saying something and having to work through what might be a difficult conversation. But difficult conversations are essential. It's how we move forward. It's how we make progress. So step into those difficult spaces and have those conversations. But again, don't assume that you're right? That the chair might have a valid argument. And so really it might be about a conversation that leads to a compromise and understanding, but the outcome of that conversation should be to improve both people's perspectives on your case.
That's great. Thank you, Helen. Unfortunately, we did have questions we didn't get to. This has been really a tremendous learning experience for all of us, I think, and great wisdom that was shared. Wonderful questions, and we really appreciate those questions. As Casey said, we will be following up with a tip sheet. We will incorporate the questions into that. We'll try to do our best to make sure that all the questions are answered and fully answered. I also wanted to say that we will follow up with a questionnaire to see if this was helpful and to see if you have other suggestions for deeper dives into any of these specific issues. We're considering, in fact, doing a series of these kicking off in fall. And so we'd love to have feedback on particular topic areas that might be of interest to this community and to the community at large. So again, we hope that this has been informative and useful. My sincere thanks to Helen, Tanya, Casey, Allison, Tracy. My very sincere thanks to Jenny Gravemeyer, Kathy Jackson, who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event go as smoothly as it has. And I thank you all very much for attending.